There are monsters we fear, and monsters we misunderstand. For thousands of years, the name Medusa has been synonymous with a nightmare given flesh. We see it in our childhood books, our movies, and our museums. The writhing snakes for hair, the fangs, the bulging eyes, and of course, that lethal gaze, a stare so cold it turns the living into silent gray stone. In the traditional hero's journey, she is nothing more than a beast to be slain, a test of courage for the young Perseus. When he raises her severed head in triumph, we are taught to cheer. We are taught that evil has been purged. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Every generation has inherited Medusa's image without ever asking how she became a monster in the first place. History has focused on her teeth and her snakes, but it ignored her heart. Tonight, we step into the long shadow of Greek mythology to ask a question history never wanted to answer. Was Medusa truly a monster? Or was she something far more disturbing? A victim whose very existence was a threat to the gods themselves. In almost every retelling, Medusa is introduced to us already cursed, already inhuman. The storytellers treat her as a force of nature, like a hurricane or a plague. She is portrayed as someone who deserves her fate because her very presence is a danger to men. She is the ultimate villain, the beast at the end of the quest. But myths are not neutral records of the past. They are shaped by power, by those who hold the pen and those who sit on the throne. To understand the real Medusa, we have to realize that the version we know was written by the same people who benefited from her destruction. When we go back to the oldest, most ancient layers of the story, the narrative begins to fracture. The monster starts to look much more like a woman. In the earliest Greek sources, Medusa was not born with snakes. She was born human. She was a young woman described as extraordinarily beautiful, so beautiful that her grace was whispered about from the markets of Athens to the halls of Olympus. She sought a life of devotion, becoming a priestess in the temple of Athena. It was a role of prestige, but it was also a role of absolute surrender. It demanded purity, obedience, and, most importantly, silence. In that temple, Medusa wasn't a person. She was a vessel for the goddess. Her body did not belong to her. It belonged to the state and the divine. She was a girl who believed that if she served the gods faithfully, she would be protected. She was wrong. The story turns dark inside the very walls meant to be sacred. According to ancient texts, Medusa was noticed by Poseidon, the god of the sea. In the ruins of the temple, Poseidon assaulted her. This was not romance, as some early poetic translations tried to claim. It was not a tryst. It was a violation, a crime committed by a powerful god against a mortal girl who had nowhere to run. But the tragedy didn't end with the assault. It began there. Greek mythology was not built to protect women. It was built to protect the ego of the gods. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, looked down at her defiled temple. She didn't punish Poseidon. He was her equal, a fellow Olympian. Instead, she turned her cold, divine rage toward the victim. She punished Medusa. She transformed the beauty Poseidon had coveted into a weapon of isolation. The hair became snakes. The face became a horror. Athena didn't do this to empower Medusa. She did it to erase her. We often think of Medusa's power as a gift of defense. But look closer. The curse didn't give her freedom. It gave her exile. Her gaze didn't empower her to live a new life. It ensured she would never be touched again. Stone is not just death.
It is permanence. It is a boundary that can never be crossed. Turning men to stone was not an act of random rage. It was the ultimate no. It was a final, desperate boundary. Do not touch. Do not approach. Do not take. The monster was a creation of the system. Athena created a monster so the world wouldn't have to look at a victim. If Medusa stayed a beautiful woman, she was a reminder of Poseidon's crime. If she became a monster, she was just something that needed to be killed. So, what would Medusa actually have looked like? Not the screaming beast of Hollywood, but the woman carrying the weight of this story. Imagine a face hardened by survival, eyes that are wide and vigilant, not out of cruelty, but because they have learned that danger comes from everywhere, even from the gods you worship. Modern AI reconstructions that strip away the mythological horror reveal a human expression shaped by betrayal. Trauma doesn't vanish. It settles into the lines of the face. It turns the gaze sharp. When we reconstruct her face, we don't find a demon. We find ourselves. We find the face of everyone who has ever been blamed for their own suffering.
Then comes the hero, Perseus. But look at how he wins. He never looks Medusa in the eye. He uses a mirror. He uses distance. He uses tools given to him by the gods who wanted Medusa gone. Perseus didn't defeat a monster. He silenced a witness. Even in death, Medusa was exploited. Her severed head was used as a weapon by Perseus, and eventually it was placed on Athena's own shield. The goddess who cursed her now used her face to terrify her own enemies. Medusa was never allowed to be a person, even in the grave. She was always just a tool for someone else's power. Why did history need Medusa to be a monster? Because a victim with a voice is dangerous. If we remembered Medusa as a human woman, we would have to admit that the great gods were monsters. We would have to admit that the hero was just an executioner. The entire mythic structure would collapse. So the world agreed to call her a beast. They turned her pain into a campfire story and her isolation into a spectacle. For centuries, the question was never asked because it was easier to fear her than to feel for her. So what was Medusa? She wasn't an innocent saint, and she wasn't a guilty demon. She was human. That is why her story endures. Behind every monster myth in our culture, there is often a victim whose voice was stolen to protect someone more powerful. Medusa doesn't turn men to stone because she hates the world. She turns them to stone because the world taught her that her only safety lies in the distance between her and everyone else. Medusa's face was never terrifying because it was monstrous. It was terrifying because it reminded the world of what happens when power is never questioned. Monster or victim? The answer you choose says very little about Medusa, but it says everything about us.